Okay, here we are with our cube set with the pivot at the center at the origin 0, 0, 0, and it is a Probuilder cube. I want to look at the face option for right now. So face selection, I'm going to go and make sure I have my move tool, shortcut key W. And if I go ahead and click on this face, notice that I'm not moving the object now, I'm just going to move this face. And if I can start to drag this out, we can see that the triangles that make up the faces that are connected have to change. And I can click on this face and decide to bring it out this way. And I can click on this face and decide to bring it up. And note that I'm not changing the scale of the object. So this is now saying that this cube is shaped as a 3 by 2 by 2 world unit, as opposed to if we were to do this with a Unity cube where we would have to modify its scale parameters like we did for the walls in Rollerball, for instance. So I made these moves perpendicular to the face, but I can also skew by moving that. And if I do that, the connected faces have to change as well. And you can see that I'm getting a rhomboid over here and on this side. And then if I decide to push this face in, I can shrink the cube. And if I collide through, then things get a little bit funky. So we'll talk about why that's going to look that way if I'm pushing to the other side like that. So with faces, I can use the move tool and adjust where the faces are in position, and all of a sudden the faces no longer have to remain perpendicular to each other. I haven't added any new geometry. That is, there are still only 2 triangles on each face. It's just how those triangles are constructed are a little bit different. I can also use the rotate tool. So I'm going to get a view of this object. You know what? I'm going to undo those transformations and come back to my base cube. I think it's just easier to see what's happening. I am going to select this top face. I'm going to use my rotate tool. And I want to rotate around the y-axis. So I'm going to rotate my cube this way. Now, you might notice that things are getting really angular really quickly. And what's the reason for this is there aren't enough vertices to do anything other than say, well, if this vertex moves here and this is the way things were connected, we have to make this edge. So this object is starting to really have some severe creases, but this is just to say the same thing would happen inside of Blender or inside of Maya or inside of Max. And it's up to the artist to try to prevent this from happening, or it's up to the artist to add more geometry, which we will get to, which will allow this to curve in a slightly smoother fashion. So let me undo that rotation. That was a Command Z or a Control Z. I can also rotate this face in a different orientation, and maybe that would give me the look that I'm going for. But if I rotate a little too far, it can start to intersect with itself, and then we get places where the material can't actually be applied. So rotations are pretty tricky. We want to be careful with those. Finally, I can go to my scale tool, and I can either scale it in one axis or the other. And It's kind of hard to see what this shape is from where we are, so let me try to help you see. This could, all of a sudden, this cube could be a very simple low poly boat, for instance. Just on the basis of those two scales. And again, very few vertices. We have one big triangle on this face and one very sharp angular triangle. If I were to look at this from the top, it's a very long rectangle, so we have two triangles here. Basically, again, no new geometry has been added. We haven't added any vertices, which means there aren't any new edges, which means that this is still basically just 6 faces, just that the faces have been altered in the way that they are connected. Let me undo, and undo, and undo. And you can see that we're, very quickly right back to our cube. Uniform scaling. We can just bring this to a point, and we're pretty close as long as we don't get these points intersecting if we go too far. Yeah, that's what I was trying to show, where now the points have collapsed through themselves and the material can't work. But if I click away, we have scaled one of these faces down so far that it is problematic. Just in that there's geometry that we can't see. But the computer still has to do the calculations for it. So we would want to clean this up by taking care of removing those faces. Scaling doesn't work when we're dealing with a face. It doesn't make sense to scale a face in the opposite direction because faces are infinitely thin. They are only two-dimensional. So you can scale in the X and Z, but not in the Y. Or on this face, I can scale on the Y and the X, but not in the Z. So it's going to be just in the orientation of the face. Which parts of these are active will depend on the orientation of the face, and of course uniform scaling occurs with the middle object, or the middle gizmo. So just like you can with faces, we can also move. So I'm going to go to edge selection mode, take this top edge, there it is. And moving that top edge is somewhat similar to scaling the face, but instead of the face working in from both sides, we've just said that this one edge needs to move over. So I can move edges. I'm going to go to rotate mode. I can rotate edges. Now rotating an edge is a line, so rotating the line on like the x-axis in this point doesn't do anything, but rotating around a different axis starts to add creases and folds. And then I can also scale that edge, and if I bring that edge in, it becomes like a pinch. So I can either scale that edge, and I really am only scaling that edge in one dimension. So in this case, the z-axis doesn't make sense. The y-axis doesn't make sense because this is an edge that's running parallel to the x-axis. I can only scale in that way. So if you think of faces as 2 dimensions and edges as 1 dimension, which means that when we get to vertex mode, for instance, since a vertex is just a point, and I'm going to undo some things and get back to my basic object. So I'm going to stay in scale mode this time. If I'm clicking on a vertex, it really doesn't make sense to scale a vertex at all because a vertex is a point. So scaling it in any dimension makes no sense because points basically have 0 dimensions. But I still can move that vertex, and now only one part of the connection of these is being moved. It's not an entire edge. Likewise, because a vertex has no dimension, rotating a vertex doesn't make sense either. So the mode that you're in, object, face, edge, or vertex, plus your normal Unity manipulation tools of move, rotate, and scale can allow us to do some modification on the basic objects that get created. When we come back in, we're going to look at the different types of objects Probuilder can build for us just from the options inside of the new shape panel.